First of all, thank you for being here today. We have a number of senators that have joined us, and we appreciate their attendance. We're here today to unveil the 2012 legislative agenda for the Republican caucus in the Senate. These are items that we have discussed in and amongst ourselves, not just this year, but really for quite some time. And what you see on the board behind us is a list of the major fundamental issues that, in the manner in which we plan to govern this year. These are the items that we want at the top of our list, and these are the items that Georgians need to know that we're working on. This, of course, is not encompassing every bill that will go through the Senate, but the major bills that will go through the Senate will fall into one of these categories. Over this last year, we had the opportunity through a series of town hall meetings we held across the state known as solution summits that literally go out and talk to people in every corner of the state and ask them, what is it you're concerned about, and what is it that we can do to make Georgia a better place to live, a better place to work, a better place to be educated? And over and over and over again, these themes continue to come back. Limited government, government that's only falling within the bounds of the Constitution, pro-growth tax reform, more jobs for Georgians. We've got to do something about our educational system. We've got to protect our children. I mean, these are the common themes that Georgians are concerned with. We didn't need to go out and take a scientific poll because we talked to Georgians one-on-one, and this is exactly what they told us. So we have a number of bills that fit into these categories and a number of bills that will be introduced in the coming days that fit into these categories. I'll start with a couple that have actually already passed the Senate. We're working with our friends in the House to see if we can get these things passed and either onto the ballot or onto the governor's desk. We'll start with an issue that has long been a hallmark of Republican legislation in this General Assembly, and that is the issue of zero-based budgeting. That measure has passed the Senate a number of times. I believe it's passed the House in a form once or twice. We believe 2012 is the year that zero-based budgeting will make it to the governor's desk, will be signed by the governor, and will finally become law. Another issue is one near and dear to my heart. It's one of the first pieces of legislation I ever introduced some 10 years ago, and that is a cap on government spending. It's the Taxpayer Protection Act, SR 20. This is a constitutional amendment that received bipartisan support in the Senate on a number of occasions now. It is sitting in the House Ways and Means Committee. I've spoken with House leadership and asked them that we could move this bill hopefully to the floor for a vote at some point, and then on to the voters where they can make a decision whether they want to put some form of cap on how much their state government can spend year after year after year, and excess revenues would not be spent on a new program, but rather would be put into the rainy day fund as they should. I want to applaud the governor, by the way, for his budget, which includes putting money back into the rainy day fund. That is absolutely necessary for our state to run in a fiscally responsible manner. So these are some of the bills that have already passed the Senate that we will begin working with our friends in the House to see if we can get those passed. One other bill that will be mentioned by a senator when he arrives here soon is the sunset legislation that you're aware of that had gone back and forth at the end of last session. We anticipate that will hopefully make it to the governor's desk soon. I want to bring up, let's start with 21st century education reform, and I want to bring up our education chairman. You know, one of the big issues that the governor alluded to in his State of the State and has really been a major point of discussion, particularly among parents across Georgia, is this issue of how do we reform Georgia's education system to fit a 21st century model, especially as it pertains to technology, and the choice that is given to parents through the opening and continuing of charter schools. We know that was obviously a big issue that the Supreme Court decided, which I think, frankly, put the state back quite in a manner that is not serving our children. But here to talk about that is our Senate Chairman, Fran Miller.
Thank you, Chip. As you know, the Supreme Court ruled, and working in conjunction with the leadership in the House, Brooks Coleman, Jan Jones, we're going to be bringing forth a constitutional amendment, so whereby the state will be able to have the locals start to participate in these state-funded, state charter special schools that we've created. We think this is critical. Here in Georgia, our charter schools have been very, very successful. If you look at the results, and that's what it should all be about, is student achievement. We need to create more of these schools, and hopefully we can get this constitutional amendment passed. We will also, on the Education Funding Commission, there'll be some legislation in that arena as well. If you saw the governor's budget, he's put some additional monies in for school nurses. We think that's critical. We're also going to probably abolish the 65% rule simply because it's shown statistically not to make a difference. It was a good idea. It sounded like a good idea, but it can't be justified. And we're also going to be reforming Title 20, which is all the educational jargon, if you look at the code. And those are some of the things we'll be dealing with in the upcoming session as respects education.
Thank you, Senator Miller. Senator Hill has joined us, and he is one of the original authors of sunset legislation, and he can give us an update on where that is and why that legislation is so critical for the taxpayers of Georgia, that we don't continue to fund operations for our state that simply aren't working out.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here and glad to have you all here. The Sunset Bill does essentially one thing, and that allows the people of the state of Georgia to really see how their government functions best. It would allow a regular assessment of all the departments and agencies on a regular basis, where the legislature could take a deep look at whether a program needs to exist and decide if it should continue to exist, we should privatize it, eliminate it, or consolidate it with another program. That's important because I think when we look at the core functions of government that are outlined in our Constitution, we owe it to the people of this state to say, are we really doing the right things? Are we focusing on the most essential core functions of government? The Sunset Bill does not eliminate, if we implement this, the Sunset Bill does not eliminate state agencies at all. What it does is allows the legislature then to make a recommendation for what type of agencies should be eliminated or consolidated. So once again, it passes all the constitutional requirements. We've done a close analysis of that. And here's the posture. It sits as an agree-disagree between the House and the Senate, and we're hoping that the conferees are appointed here soon. I'm getting word that they might be over in the House of Representatives, and then the Senate's ready to take action as soon as possible the week that we get back.
Last year, the Blue Ribbon Commission came back with a list of recommendations on how to move our economy or our tax code into the 21st century. Some of those recommendations were very good. Others were both problematic from a policy standpoint and a political standpoint. But the time in which the special committee that was created to consider those recommendations extends to the remainder of this year. As you know, because some of you have been at those meetings, we've already met on a couple of occasions. But please know that the work for recreating Georgia's tax system continues, and whether it is done on a small scale or a large scale, the single most important focus is creating jobs for Georgians. And to talk to that is our Senate Finance Chairman, Bill Heath.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Thank you all for being here. When we traveled across the state asking folks what we could do to create more jobs for Georgians, the two things we heard most was reducing regulatory burden and reducing the tax burden on Georgians. Last year, you heard us all talk about the sales tax on energy used in ag and manufacturing and mining. I think there is consensus on that. I hope to see that move this year, and hopefully work together with our friends on the House side to do other things to make Georgia more attractive for jobs. I think that's very critical as Georgia recovers from the recession, that we shine above the other states in the Southeast as a place very friendly to do business.
And then the last issue, and as you can see, most of the issues that we have on this board deal with really the fundamentals of government, making sure our government is smaller and more efficient, making sure our tax code is not punishing people who want to create, and making sure that our children are educated. But the last issue is one that's near and dear to many hearts in this room, and that is the protection of our children. We have seen through various unfortunate news stories over the last year that sometimes these stories come to light after many, many years. And as we reviewed Georgia law, we recognized that maybe we don't have enough protections in place. So Senator Underman, who has long been a champion for children in this state, and Senator Bethel, who has brought forth a very good idea, have a couple of bills that we want to make at the top of our list as our top priorities for protecting children, and I'll let them explain those.
Peter. It's a pleasure to have y'all here today, and it was music to my ears when I attended some of those town hall meetings, and I heard mothers especially get up and talk about child welfare in the state of Georgia. And it's not just about education, it's the social welfare component of it. 3 years ago, I wrote a piece of legislation, Senate Bill 69, and that deals with child abuse and mandatory reporting of child abuse, and some of you in this room covered that particular bill. And at that that time, it was very difficult to get a piece of legislation about child abuse through. And since that time, the state of Georgia has been ranked and across the nation with other states in rankings on social welfare and child welfare. And in that ranking, one of the things that was pointed out was this particular legislation. And with the recent allegations that happened in Pennsylvania, I think it's a good time to bring that bill back forward. As a component of that bill, 7 different professionals were listed that had to be mandatory reporters of child abuse, and they had a certain amount of time that they had to report it and certain penalties for not reporting. So what we're going to do this year is drop a piece of legislation in conjunction with Senator Bethel's bill, and this will remove those 7 professionals and open it up for anyone who acknowledges or sees child abuse. That is their fiduciary responsibility and the law, hopefully, that they have to report that child abuse. The only exception that I have talked to legislators in the House and in the Senate, and they said, well, what about ministers, rabbis, people who do counseling, and those will be exempted, and also attorneys and anyone who has attorney-client privileges, they would be exempted. So we're looking forward to this legislation. It took 3 years, and Governor Perdue signed that legislation. We're looking forward to Governor Deal being able to sign this piece of legislation.
Thank you, Senator Unterman. I want to say thank you to my caucus for giving me the opportunity to represent a piece of legislation that I think we stand really uniformly in support of, and that is the extension of the statute of limitations for crimes against children, sex crimes against children. Senator Unterman's bill talks about how we identify these individuals in our communities, and the bill that I'll be dropping on Monday addresses what we do when we find them. Unfortunately, child sex crime is a problem that we have to face in Georgia. This is a Georgia problem. It's an international and global problem, and what we want to send is a loud and clear message that those that hurt Georgia's children will be held accountable. And so we're talking about a bill that would extend the statute of limitations based on the victim's age, such that anyone who commits a crime of a sexual nature against a child in Georgia who's under the age of 16, the statute of limitations would be held off, we call that tolled in the legal world, but be held until the victim reaches the age of 18. And then we would run the statute for 10 years, and for forcible rape it'd be 15 years. That's already the statute term for forcible rape in Georgia, so it would be longer. We didn't want to create a scenario where there's any chance that a statute could actually be shorter under these provisions, so that's why that's a separate statute term. But essentially we look at these situations and we recognize that very often minor children, for any number of reasons, have difficulty reporting these crimes, have difficulty testifying about these crimes, and it's often years later that we're able to get the full story from victims. And the simple truth is we have situations where victims of these crimes have no recourse in Georgia's courts. And so we're trying to extend the long arm of the law, if you will, to make sure that those that are hurting children in Georgia have no safe place to be and no home in our state. And hopefully this will increase our ability to address that problem.
Thank you, Senator Unterman and Senator Bethel. So to wrap up, the Republican Senate caucus stands united on these principles, and that is we want a government that lives within the bounds of the Constitution. We want a budget that only does those things that are required for government to do and allows the resources that the people themselves have generated to remain in their pocket as opposed to being sent to us unless it's absolutely necessary. We want a government that protects our children and makes sure that they're very well educated. So those are the things that the Senate Republican caucus stands united for. Those are the things we're going to work on this year, and hopefully we'll be able to report back in late March that we have completed those tasks.